Sup, my name is Escapich. So, I got into Dragonflight beta, played around with some new and old stuff there, and I feel like this expansion I wanna dive deep into Mythic Plus content for the first time in my life. Despite tank being the least popular role in the game forever, it was always my favorite. So, to choose a class to start my Dragonflight journey with, I played every tank spec on beta, and in this video I break them all down for you. This will probably be most helpful to new or returning players, so I'll cover class fantasy, basic mechanics and game style, and just general feel of every tank spec. Quick disclaimer, I've never been a high-end raider or a Mythic Plus goblin, so I'm not an all-knowing expert on anything really, hence I might be wrong about some stuff, and I will not talk about efficiency, viability and all that jazz. This video is about finding a tank you'll hopefully enjoy playing as, and that's it. Let's start with Warrior. Not gonna lie, Dragonflight is my first time playing the class, and I've been around, although very sporadically, since Burning Crusade. The Warrior class fantasy always seemed blunt and generic to me. You're just this big dude smacking stuff with whatever you can hold in your hands, right? But after trying different classes out, I actually think this somewhat open or neutral class fantasy can actually be a good thing, because it allows you to make your character whatever you want, really. A huge orc in loincloth with wooden shield and a club, a mysterious magical being in enchanted armor, or anything in between. Visuals, while not being flashy, have their own charm, and sound design is great. You can feel the weight of your slams and strikes, the oomph is there. Check it out. When it comes to gameplay, warriors have a resource called Rage. You generate it with your damage rotation abilities like Shield Slam and Thunderclap, and also with various cooldowns like Charge, Shield Charge, Demoralizing Shout and more. Then you spend Rage either to deal damage with Revenge or execute one enemy on low HP, or on Shield Block and Ignore Pain. These two buffs are your bread and butter, as they provide damage reduction, sustain, and even increase your damage too. So you should keep their uptime as high as possible. Warriors can have great mobility with Shield Charge, Intervene, Heroic Leap, and 2 charges of Charge. Duh. And then, of course, you have a whole bunch of your offensive and defensive cooldowns too. If you watch my action bars closely, you'll notice that plenty of abilities are off global cooldown, and that there are some procs to watch out for. All this together makes Protection Warrior a relatively high-paced spec, but it's not overwhelming, it actually flows great. I always feel like in control and can quickly adapt to most situations. Overall, Warrior is very fun and versatile spec. Paladin. Basically, a warrior but holy. So, originally Paladins were a religious cult, worshipping holy light. Think your classic RPG clerics and buzzwords like Holy Order, Light, Crusade and all that stuff. Honestly, I was never a fan of this religious fanaticism shtick, so I was very happy when Blizzard expanded the lore and added more perspectives on the light. Nowadays, it's less of some mysterious divine thing and more of an element, a force of nature if you will. So, you can be a Tauren Sunwalker who draws their power from the sun, or Blood Elf, Blood Knight who used to draw their power from a living arrow, but they're cool now. Anyways, you have some room for roleplay here, but ultimately you will wield Power of Light. So expect to have a few abilities called Divine Something and lots of bright yellow and white colors in your animations. Also, sound design is distinct and satisfying. Check this out. Paladins have a resource called Holy Power that is generated by your base rotation abilities like Judgment and Blessed Hammer. You can spend 3 Holy Power to heal yourself or your friend with Word of Glory, or to smack your enemies with Shield of the Righteous, which also gives you an armor buff, so you have to use it at a steady tempo to keep the buff up. Then there's Avenger's Shield. In my opinion, the reason to play Paladin. It deals good damage, applies silence, and also grants you an Absorb Shield, which ends up being a big part of your sustain. Then there is a dopamine generator button called Divine Toll that launches Avenger's Shield at 5 targets. I'll just show it to you instead of trying to explain. Paladins have Divine Steed for mobility, which is a glorified movement speed buff and is fine, but overall they are on the slower side among tanks. Then your usual bunch of defensive and offensive cooldowns, with notable mentions being Blessings and Lay on Hands, huge defensive abilities that can be used on your friends too. Overall, I'd call Paladin gameplay methodical or maybe like rotational. There are some procs, but it feels like there's more order to it compared to Warrior, and it's not a bad thing. I've had a lot of fun playing this spec. Death Knight. On the opposite side from Paladins, we have Death Knights. Every one of them died and then was resurrected to become what they are. And their class fantasy is in the name. They are about death, but also decay, diseases, insidious chill that makes your blood freeze, and vampirism. As you can see, while there are some different themes to explore, they are all dark and gruesome. Blood Decay in particular emphasizes the vampiric aspect of class, so many of your abilities sound like there's blood splattering everywhere, but you also have a couple heavy sounding attacks. You wield a two-handed weapon after all. DK is the sustain tank, so there's a lot of self-healing and absorption shields. They are all about managing a variety of resources, starting with the most important one, HP, but also runes, runic power and bone shield charges. Runes regenerate over time. Abilities that spend runes generate runic power, and then you spend runic power on Death Strike, which deals damage, provides you with important buffs and, most importantly, heals you. There is of course a lot more nuance to it, but basically it comes down to controlling your runic power so you have Death Strike available to heal when your HP drops low. But also don't munch on runic power and spend it regularly to deal damage and keep buffs up. DKs only have a couple of movement speed buffs for mobility, so they're kinda slow, but compensate for it in a very unique way. You control the battleground by pulling enemies to your feet with 2 charges of Death Grip, Abomination Limb and Gorfind Grasp. Also, I like that some of their cooldowns play on the class fantasy instead of being a generic X% damage reduction. For example, Vampiric Blood increases your health and also healing and absorbs received, capitalizing on that sustain tank theme. Overall, Death Knight provides a unique approach to encounters with their grips and offers the most agency to the player. You control the battlefield and your HP, unlike any other tank in the game, and it feels great.
Cut my life. This is my last resort. Suffocation.
Demon Hunter. The ultimate edgelord class. Half demons who trained for 10,000 years and sacrificed everything. And also something like this.
The light will heal your scars.
I am my scars!
The light is your destiny.
My destiny is my own!
Yeah, DH is Illidan Stormrage, the class. So the fantasy here is very specific and limited, but I feel like it is delivered really well. I mean, you can turn into demon, or grow demonic spikes on your back, or draw demonic sigils on the ground. I feel like sound design and animations are alright, but some of them leave a lot to be desired. For example, Spirit Bomb, it reads like it's supposed to be this cool demonic explosion, but it just goes poof when you press it. Gameplay-wise, across all tanks, Demon Hunter feels the most like you're playing a DPS spec. Like, yeah, you have your maintenance tank above demon spikes, but other than that, at the base level, most of your tanking mechanics are applied automatically by just executing your basic builder-spender damage rotation. There is of course room for min-maxing. Demon spikes cannot have 100% uptime. There's also managing and playing around your frailty debuff stacks, And also, kiting is sometimes a big aspect of Demon Hunter specifically. But overall, they're probably the most simplistic tank spec, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Demon Hunter is a versatile tank that has great mobility with 2 long-range jumps, self-sustain, some party utility with sigils, and it is actually pretty fun to play. Monk is another class with somewhat neutral fantasy. They are martial artists, specialized in unarmed combat, and they're also about inner peace or something. Any race can be a monk, because almost everything fits, really. As a brewmaster, you can be a classic Pandaren, drunken brawler with beer in your kegs, or you can be, I don't know, a Nightborn sipping on their mana tea or Arkwine and using their natural arcane affinity to empower their fists in combat. Their animations are slick and stylish, and sound design is on point too. So, Monk's unique tanking mechanic is Stagger. It cuts a portion of incoming damage and makes you receive it over time instead, basically smoothing your damage intake. You can even decrease the delayed damage by using your Purifying Brew. Then, there's also an Absorb shield and a couple of damage reduction cooldowns. However, Brewmaster Monk has the lowest self-sustain out of all tanks, and it seems like it is an intended sort of trade-off for Stagger. When it comes to dealing damage, Brewmaster probably has the most complex rotation of all tanks. There are 2 short duration buffs to maintain and a bunch of cooldowns that should be used in specific order. Like, you use Blackout Kick to buff your Keg Smash, then Keg Smash to buff and reset cooldown of your next Breath of Fire, which gives you your Charred Passions buff. But also, you should have used Rising Jade Wind at some point, and don't even get me started on longer cooldowns like Exploding Keg and Bone Dust Brew. Monk is the only tank spec that I feel like I'm starved on global cooldowns. It feels like you set everything up, press like one button, and then have to go back to setting everything up. With that being said, you are actually constantly pumping good damage, and it flows alright when you get used to it. So, monks are pretty mobile, they have a row or 2 and the movement speed increase called Tiger's Last. They also have a very unique and fun ability called Ring of Peace, which places a circle on the ground and pushes enemies out of it. Overall, monks are historically powerful tanks who are actually very fun to play. Druid. So, at their core, Druids have 2 major themes going. First is their connection to nature and arcane magic, to moon and sun, basically your classic Druid tropes. Second theme is shapeshifting. You can turn into bear, a cat, and a bunch of other creatures. Guardian Druid's primary form is bear. Well, we call it bear, but actually it can be something different depending on your race, and there's also a bunch of skins unlockable through various in-game activities. Bears mostly rip and tear their enemies with claws, but there's also some magic action going on in the form of Moonfire. Then there's a talent called Galactic Guardian that gives all your damage a chance to trigger an additional Moonfire and also empower your next manual Moonfire. So, in a big pool, you end up dropping Moonfires left and right, which sounds, looks and feels unique and absolutely amazing. At glance, Bear Tank seems like a slightly simplified warrior, and it is true to a degree. The resource is Rage, which is generated by basic rotation that consists of a few short cooldown abilities and a filler. Then there are also a couple of procs to watch out for. You can spend Rage on Iron Fur, your maintenance buff which gives you armor and also can stack, or on Frenzied Regeneration for some good heals. There are your usual defensive cooldowns, and then there's Incarnation. Basically a spec-defining big cooldown. My favorite moment in Shadowlands was when Guardian Druid said "It's incarnating time!", pulled the whole dungeon, took 0 damage and top of DPS meters. For Dragonflight, it seems they lowered Incarn power a bit, while also making you slightly better outside of it. but it still seems to be an integral part of the spec. Druids are fairly mobile between their wild charge that functions differently depending on the form you use it in, travel form, dash and cat form, and stampede and roar, which gives movement speed boost to you and your friends. In the end, despite the community seemingly being doom and gloom about Guardian Druids, I actually really like it. So here's that. I know I promised not to talk about viability and efficiency, but I've been watching streams of skilled players like Dorky doing M+ keys on beta, and they seem to share their opinion that tanks are actually pretty close to each other in terms of power. For me and you, it means we can pick class with our hearts. Personally, I'm probably going to start with a warrior because I really enjoyed it on beta, and also I've never played one on max level. My second pick would be a Death Knight because I like their fantasy and mechanics, and my third pick would be a Guardian Druid. I feel like for me it can be a very fun alt. Well, if you are still with me that deep into the video, I would appreciate any feedback in comments below, and thank you for watching. Goodbye!